A typical joint venture, the board would be in control. What is different from a real estate joint venture is the position and the role of the manager. The manager has day-to-day responsibility for the decision-making with regard to the property. Those decision-making abilities and authority will be set out in their management agreement. Strategic oversight and, importantly, strategic decisions and investment decisions will be retained by the board. The decision-making powers on that board are usually held, or always held, by the investor. The money talks in circumstances of control and governance. So the investor will have nomination rights for the entirety of that board usually, or occasionally the manager as the minority investor will have one board seat or possibly a board observer. There are different joint venture structures. Where we talk about boards, we're talking about JV companies who are companies as opposed to funds. We can also consider JV structures that are fund structures. Funds will have a limited partnership, and that limited partnership will have as its decision-making body a general partner. And the general partner, by and large, serves the role of the board of directors of that fund. So the general partner will effectively assume the decision-making role, subject to the authority that is delegated both through the reserve matters and through the various management agreements that it's signed up. So it's important to remember, depending upon your fund structure, what the different governance bodies are, and take account of those accordingly. The manager/minority investors' protections are through their reserve matters. These are decisions that the shareholders need to take, usually unanimously, and they relate to strategic decisions that protect the rights and the interests of the manager as the minority investor. Now, on occasion, depending upon the number of investors, if there is more than one investor, in addition to the manager, then the scope of those reserve matters may be different. There may be some which are unanimous and some which require a supermajority. Now, that will all depend upon whether there is a single investor or multiple investors. The question mark then comes, what happens if there is deadlock? Deadlock is a situation where the investors cannot agree over those reserve matters. Now, in some circumstances, deadlock can remain and the status quo will prevail. That is usually only where the deadlock is in relation to a matter where the business of the joint venture, and particularly the property, can continue notwithstanding the deadlock. However, where there are key decisions that must be made in the interests of the joint venture as a whole, and those decisions are deadlocked because of the reserve matters, then there will be a deadlock resolution mechanism, usually in the joint venture agreement. And this will often involve some form of exit right or buyout mechanism in favour of the majority investor over those investors, usually the minority investor manager, who are voting against that particular decision. Another key component of governance and decision making is your key person. Typically every JV structure will have one. They will be a key employee of the manager. The manager's key employee is the main reason, or often one of the main reasons, why the investor has paired up with that manager for that particular investment. They will be the most knowledgeable person within the fund manager and be key to the ongoing investment decisions of the investor. That key person will be identified in advance, and there'll be various provisions within the agreement that will cater for what happens if they either cease to be employed or something happens to them, either death or other things outside of their control. Often it relates to options for the investor with regard to exit if there is a key person event. However, it is important from the manager's side that they ensure that there are rights for them to replace the key person in the event a key person event happens. Now, those usually revolve around finding a similar person with similar experience who would be reasonably acceptable to the lead investor. And it's important from the manager's side to ensure that objectivity is used when determining whether that replacement key person is acceptable, and so as to avoid any investor gaming or otherwise manipulating a key person clause in an agreement. There will be certain roles that will be outsourced, not to the manager, but to other third-party providers, corporate services, accounting services that you'll need to get right, and they will be in a separate contract to the management contract. Same with any joint venture, conflicts between the shareholders in the joint venture and any third-party service providers or other stakeholders in that joint venture are important to keep an eye on and to provide for appropriately in your JV documents.